This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, this is Alexandra, and I have been so excited to have this conversation. My guests today are Deepa Kannan and Shyam Nair. They are both in India, and I've spoken with Deepa once before when she interviewed me for her podcast, The Sleep Whisperer. And by the way, if you want to listen to our interview, it's really wonderful about sleep and intimacy and how couples can navigate the challenges in that. Look for The Sleep Whisperer, because the first time I went to find her podcast in order to prepare for the interview, I listened to a podcast called Sleep Whisperer, and it's all stories told in a whisper by a man. That is not the podcast that I am recommending.
Yeah.
It is The Sleep Whisperer. Anyway, when Deepa interviewed me, I had an experience I have never before had. I talked about uncompromising intimacy and what that means to me and how important it is. And for the first time, before I gave any of my explanations, Deepa knew exactly what I meant. She knows what an uncompromising marriage is and what it means to live in uncompromising intimacy. And it's so exciting for me that this couple who lives in India, while I am here in California, through a very different journey, has come to so many of the same conclusions about how to live a passionate, dynamic marriage, which is deeply gratifying for both participants and serves others in the world as well. So that's the context for this conversation. And I'd like to introduce each of them. So Deepa Kannan, well, you're really a Renaissance woman with so many areas of expertise. But the things I want to mention is that you merged the science of functional medicine with deep symbolism of ancient wisdom. And you have expertise in sleep, nutrition, women's health, detoxification, skin health, and adrenal function. And for anyone who has spent any time focused on functional medicine, Dr. Mark Hyman is a familiar name to you, and Deepa's work has been shared by him. Is there anything that you want to add, Deepa, so our listeners know more of the amazing woman you are?
No, thank you for having me, Alexandra. That was a great and gratifying introduction. And I don't think I could add anything to it, actually. You did such a great job.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm so glad. And Shyam, I'm reading from what you sent, but really it reads like poetry. You're a yoga expert, an organic farmer, a wellness consultant, and a Kundalini Yoga expert who lived in the Himalayan caves. I feel like that's something that should be put to music. But in any case, is there anything you'd like to add, Shyam?
Well, you've actually put it in an essence, all of that. And more than everything else, I would think that I'm a most passionate person about life.
Will you say what that means?
When I say what that means, it's a very simple philosophy that life is a beautiful journey. How you make it the most wonderful experience is in your own hand. You don't need anything else other than your own self to look inward and enjoy every bit of yourself. Then you will start enjoying every bit of others around you.
So, Shyam, did you basically arrive on Earth in this incarnation with that understanding? Or is that something you've learned through the course of your biography?
I would say that the first one was the truth, because I feel that from the age of 5, I've been on a quest of spiritual journey. and it still never stopped, and it continues to be. So that's something which I always believe, that my life had a purpose of this beautiful journey. It's that all the intersections are just part of my uh, what you call it, learning from this journey furthering my further journey towards knowing myself.
I love that you've shared that, because the next thing that I want to share is that I've actually had amazing women who listen to the marriage podcast reach out to me saying, I'm in my second relationship, my second important, deep, committed relationship. I really want to hear from a mature couple that has navigated having prior partners, getting divorced, and now has found something amazing with one another. I want inspiration from people who are living that experience. And I just grinned when I read that email, because I knew I'd be speaking with the two of you soon. And you've shared with me that you each in your previous marriages experienced isolation, dejection, and failure. And it's not really my inclination to delve into isolation, dejection, and failure for its own sake or to sentimentalize it. There's a time and a place for it, but it's not really on the marriage podcast. However, I'd love to hear from each of you enough of a description of your first marriages so that we can really see the absolutely profound contrast that you've created when we talk about the marriage you have with one another. Deepa, would you be willing to share something about that?
Sure. So, Alexandra, I think I'm not sure if you're aware, but India has a large section of the population where arranged marriages are very common. Surprisingly, my marriage the first time around wasn't arranged. I actually did think I was in love with the man, and maybe I was, or maybe I was infatuated at a very young age and jumped into something in an effort, I think, to also get away from feeling a little stifled at home. And I was very young, and somewhere along the way, I think we were both not mature. We were, first of all, the same age, which that's a big difference with me and Shyam, because we're 10 years apart. And I feel that does make a world of difference, because sometimes at 23, a girl at 23 might be far more mature than a boy at 23. So maybe that was the main thing that was not quite right. And he lost his father very early, so he was looking after the business. So I think it didn't really give us a space to actually create a great relationship, and it became very unpleasant because families were not really getting along. And I think I don't want to point fingers at anyone, because I think many times when people come away from a broken marriage, there's a tendency to blame, and I think that's not quite right. Maybe both people are not exactly in a frame of mind at that point in time to create a good relationship. So I would probably put it down to a little immaturity on my part as well, because my expectations were different. I didn't probably accept the person as it is, and that's very different now with Shyam. We just accept each other. But it did become an unpleasant marriage, which lasted for a long time. And then it is, being in a broken marriage is something like a bad habit. It takes a lot of effort to actually get away from that. And I, if you'd like to know something specific, I can talk about that. But I would say I would put all of that down to just immaturity on the part of both people. And maybe it was, of course, I wouldn't quite disregard it, because when you fail once, then I think you learn from all those mistakes and see, okay, what might you do better the second time around. And that's important because this time around, there's no conditions. Let me give you an example. So I think I was conditional in the first marriage, where I did put expectations that if my husband struggled to get along with my family, then that created a discord between us. But this time around, it's different. So I'm very clear that if Shyam has a disagreement with somebody in my family and wants to keep a little distance for a while, I just put it down to, look, that's between the two of you. That's not going to affect our relationship. And that can be a game changer for marriages.
Absolutely. I have one question that I don't feel completely clear from your otherwise really quite remarkable response. And that is, did you at one point really have what at the time felt like a wonderful marriage, which then deteriorated? Or was it never really wonderful at any point?
No, I don't think looking back, I think that the biggest difference was I went into the marriage. I saw two parents where my mother didn't work all her life. So it was somewhere agreed quietly that the woman stays home and takes care of everything. And I married a man who explicitly told me that he believed women should sit at home and take care and provide a good home for a man who's out working. And maybe because of the scenario I had faced as a child, I thought that that was a great approach. But then along the way, when you realize that you have bigger dreams and you have bigger visions, and then you're not quite fitting together in that space, and you feel a bit stifled as well, because you can't grow as an individual, because frankly every person on this earth is far more than just who they are in a relationship, right? They have their own dreams, they have their own. So I think somewhere that was a big reason why things failed. And maybe I don't know, it works for many people, Alexandra, but I think whoever I've come, and when you spoke about that introduction about Dr. Hyman sharing some of my work, honestly, whatever I am today, this dynamic woman is all because Shyam has provided a space where I can grow to be myself. There's no way that he ever tells me that you're not doing your part. For example, if I were to have a day filled with deadlines, he would just say, hey, don't worry about anything, just go do that. And I think we must appreciate, especially as I think it is there all over the world, but maybe more so in India, that for a really brilliant, beautiful, and successful woman, it does take the right father and the right partner to be able to allow you to become that dynamic woman.
I think it's likely worldwide. It certainly is true in the United States as well. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, has said the very most important career decision she's ever made was choosing a spouse, or choosing which spouse. Yeah. Well, what you've said brings many questions to mind, but I want to make sure to bring Shyam into the conversation here. Would you share whatever you'd like to present about your experience in your first marriage, specifically in how it provided a context for creating this marriage so differently?
Yeah, very interesting part about this is that, what happens about in everyone's life, you have been given a philosophy as a child, by either either of your parents, and you tend to kind of carry that philosophy with you, because eventually that's what you become. Every parent is protective about their child. Eventually they want them to have a better life. So it's wrong on the kids' part to think that as a conditioning, because eventually the parents are looking for the betterment of their children. Yes, there may be idealistically a lot of difference in all of us. When you grow up with an ideology, or when you come across a new ideology, you want to adopt that, but it conflicts with your parents' ideology. That's all part of a growing. That's what is called evolution, which is why I have one tagline I always tell people, my students and my shishyas, that all evolution is life and all stagnation is death.
Yes.
So if you do not evolve from what you learn, whether it is in terms of your journey in life, from what you experience and what you are experiencing, you're not evolving, and you're a dead person, as good as. You need to keep evolving out of that. That's when you become your life. So to come back to that point of my philosophical thing, my father used to be I would call it as he was my first guru, or first teacher and guru, because he had a lot of knowledge, even though he had hardly educated himself. But he had a very deep knowledge of human life and human science, So somewhere down the line, I was 30, closer to 30, and my marriage hadn't happened because I had a lot of responsibilities in family. From the age of 16, I've been working and taking care of family. And at one point in time, my father was paralyzed and bedridden. He couldn't take care of. So he used to very sadly tell me that, I'm sorry, I didn't get you married. So somewhere down the line, I met this girl, and she was also from similar background of she wants to get away from her family, like how Deepa wanted to get away from her family. And so I just happened to like her, and she kind of very passionately said, I'm also in love with you, marry me fast. And so I kept telling her eventually, look, let's wait for some more time, because I want you to get, So when I got married to her, I was 30 and she was 20. So there was an age difference, of course, but then the maturity levels were completely not there. And as she was from a very poor family, didn't have a great life, she came into my life. She had a fantastic life. So the mindset changed for her. Her desires and ambitions became multifolded. So she wanted to become more and more rich and wealthy. She wanted to work, all that. I said, fine, work, for which you need to finish your study. And eventually it happened so that, there was frequent quarrels between us on various aspects, where I was looking at it from a point of protection, slow growth for her, so that eventually she is able to maturely handle it. But she was too ambitious in a way that, she's going to go reckless. I knew that. So somewhere I thought maybe matures her if she becomes a mom. So I said, we should have a child. She was reluctant finally. Then she had an incident where the doctor said, if you don't have a child now, you are not going to have ever, because your fallopian tubes have got, once it burst and there was an issue. So finally we had a child. And I thought at least that will transform. But it went the other way around. She started abandoning two of us. She started abandoning me as well as the child. She used to dump her child in her mom's place, and used to be. So I used to work in a different city, and then in the meanwhile she got into an affair, and I came to know about it. When I confronted her, she apologized and said it was a mistake. I did by mistake. Sorry, forgive. I will not. I said, okay, let's start fresh. It didn't. It started fresh for me, but it didn't start fresh for her ever, because she was still in that thing. Eventually, I've realized that later part, after a couple of months, that she continued to have that same process of affair and, secret life. And that's the turning point in my life, where I went away to the Himalayas. And I lived in the Himalayas. I went away and studied in Bihar School of Yoga, everything. And then I wandered in the Himalayas, where I met my guru, with whom I lived almost 3 years in the cave of Himalayas, and learned the art of Kundalini, the science and art of Kundalini Yoga. And I was fortunate enough, with his blessings, I was able to awaken my Kundalini and realize, experience Samadhi, or the ultimate realization. And one fine morning, I always been brought up with this tradition that where you follow your teachers, don't question them. So he said, you go back. I said, where do I go back? I have nobody to go back, nowhere to go back. He said, go back wherever you have come back. You still have a lot of karmic work to finish. And I landed up in Bangalore, and I was trying for a job, and then I landed up in a place called Urban Yoga, which was being set up. At that time, they were conceptualizing. I helped them set up the whole thing. And that's where I met Deepa.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for laying this context. And I want to jump forward to something you shared with me, Deepa, that the two of you fully express yourselves, that one of the foundational qualities in your marriage is that you don't hold back, even if that means unabashed yelling at one another. Will you describe what that is to be so fully self-expressed, so uncensored, so trusting that there's absolutely nothing you would express that would damage your marriage? Because your marriage, I mean, I'm saying this, you didn't say it, but I'm inferring that you both feel that your marriage is strong enough to hold absolutely any light and any darkness that is within you that comes out in words or gesture. Have I characterized it correctly, Deepa?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely perfect, Alexandra. And I think you're so right when you spoke about trust and safety, because I think that it really requires a very safe space where you feel you can be brutally honest. First of all, Shyam is brutally honest, and that's where I learned it from, because obviously I didn't have that voice growing up. And I didn't have that voice in my first marriage. So for me, it was very new to see somebody. And I'll tell you that when I first used to hear Shyam being so blunt, I would get very bothered by it. But I think it opened up this great avenue, because then we both became that. And I think also the key thing to understand for anybody, if you want to be so honest in your relationship, is one, of course, you have to feel that it's not going to damage your relationship, because otherwise you will hold yourself back. But the second is that we don't really hold on to those words. Sometimes we're just tired. Sometimes we're just having a bad day and we just, blurt out something. One of the things that we both do is we can be so honest that it's really, we are yelling at each other. But a few hours later, we don't sit down. We don't say, hey, let's talk about what you said to me, what I said to you. No, it's just forgotten. It actually dissipates. What we've done is just let go of all the frustration that we felt on each other. And it's not necessarily true that it might be that we said something because we meant to say something. It could just be that somewhere there is a loop of anger, Alexandra. So if you've been on the receiving end of irritation from your boss or from a client, sometimes you just come back home and you're irritated and then you just need an outlet. So it's not necessarily that we mean to say something all the time, but I think it's important that you don't go and dissect that conversation later and sit down and say, but you said this, but you said that. No, you just let go.
I'm reminded of a story about an Indian guru, this man who was an older monk traveling with a very new young monk in the order somewhere in India. And they were part of an order which one of the agreements, one of the rules was not to touch a woman. And this older monk and the younger one were walking, and they came to a river which was swollen. And there was this beautiful young woman there. And she came up to them and said, I need to get to the other side and I'm not able to cross. Would you be so kind and carry me? And the older monk picked her up and carried her across and then put her down. And the two monks continued to walk. And about a mile or two later, the young monk said to this older monk, "Teacher, how could you have carried the woman?" And he said to the young monk, "I put her down when we crossed the river. You're still carrying her."
Exactly that. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I'd love to ask you what's really a burning question for me, Shyam, because
Yes.
I'm aware of men who are blunt because they are unaware and don't perceive their impact and just are insensitive. I think we all know men like that. But
Absolutely.
otherwise, I mean, and women too, that wasn't a gender specific comment. But in any case, otherwise, in my experience, two people typically need to grow into being comfortable enough to be very direct and honest in a way that comes from a loving foundation and a devotion to truth. It seems like you skipped that on ramp and just were that way from the first encounters. Do I have that right, Shyam? And if so, will you share how you think about it?
Alexandra, the point is that the men who are blunt, there are two kinds. The one who are sensitive, who are blunt, and the one who are morons, who are blunt. Sorry
Yes.
to say that. Sorry to say that.
Yeah.
The one who are sensitive
I
and
agree.
blunt, the one who are sensitive and blunt are honest about what they feel because they are protective about that person's sensitivity. And they want them to know that, if you walk that path, you're going to go into a ditch. So don't do that. The one who are moron want you to walk into that path is why they tell you that blunt. Because basically they push you down the hill. So the point is, I have turned open over a period of understanding of how, I've grown up with a lot of women around me. I've had 3 sisters who I've seen how they have been oppressed in many ways as kids, as young ladies and things like that. Even though my father was a very progressive thinker, my mother was a very conservative lady. She became a progressive person only after she met Deepa, or my first wife. My first wife was a little progressive. She was a little progressive with her, but with Deepa, she became much more progressive in many ways because, I've set that boundaries. She used to talk about her, and I used to say, look, you have lived your life, it's her life. So don't get involved with it. I'm your son, I will always be your son. I'm her husband, I will always be her husband. So don't try to mingle this relationship. You have your relationship with me, she has my relationship with me. So don't try to cross over that. And you keep that respect and you will get that respect back. So eventually it became so good that she used to love Deepa more than everybody else in my family. So it's for the man to set the boundaries, whether it is with his family or whether it is with his mother, or, for how a relationship is built around. So you can be a moron who's blunt, or you can be a, honest, sensitive person who's a blunt person. So that is where I always believe that, every woman, you should even not look at it as a woman as women, man as man. I always say that they are two human beings. How much you feel, everything in you, they also have that feeling. If you respect that part, then you don't have to think of, oh, she is slow, she should be. Why should it be? Why should she cook? Why can't I cook one day? So the point is that when you look at as a gender-based approach rather than human-based approach, you tend to become feudalistic. You tend to become the so-called moron. If you consider as the two human-faced approach, you think that two humans are trying to live together in a happy environment. As long as each of you respect and relate with the other and their emotions, your life becomes the simplest journey. It's like on a train journey, you have many people around. You may not like some people the way they behave, but that doesn't mean that you walk out of the train and jump out of the train.
Yes.
Who's the loser eventually?
I understand. And actually, I'm going to restate in another way what I understand you to be saying. And I really came to this interview curious to comprehend the essence of what has the two of you be so beautifully uncompromising and self-expressed. And I feel like I just heard it in the response you just gave, Shyam. And the way that I would express it is that you have each done the inner work, maybe partly while you were together or mostly before. It doesn't actually matter. But you've done the inner work to interact with one another as whole individuals instead of interacting with one another as a person in a particular role. So I think when you're saying to let go of the gender elements, it's like instead of seeing Deepa as a person who inhabits wife in your life, she is an individual that you engage with in a way that is fresh and honoring and evolving as an individual. Would you agree with that way of describing?
I would 100% agree with that. And I would also extend a little bit on that. To be precisely putting it in a very simple way, that in order for you to give somebody something, you need to have that first with you.
Okay,
so in order
say
to
that again slower, because I think this is so wise. And let's hear it.
In order to give somebody something, you need to have that with you. In order to know another person, you need to know your own self first. If you don't know who you are and what you want, the other person has no magical wand to touch you and know, oh, this is what he wants or she wants. So first, when you know what you want, you lay out your foundation in front of the other person. This is what as I am as a person. That's what I did with Deepa. Look, I'm a blunt guy, but I will be sensitive. You want to take it that way? I can be. If you don't want that, I can be the person who completely shuts up myself. You go through the shit and then come back when you're screwed up, and then you come back to me. So she said, no, I would.
If he is the blunt moron at times, I will make sure that I tell him to his face that he's being a moron.
Absolutely. That's the point. End of the day, I've also got that blunt moron in me. I'm not saying that I'm holier than thou. I am also taken a human life in this world. So I am also involved with the pull and push of this, the churning that happens around me. It's not something new. Yeah, in order to share that, which is why I always tell people, when you say that, I love you, when you say, do you have love in you first to say the other person that you love? Do you love your own self first? If you don't love your own self first, there is thing, which is what my father used to give me a very profound statement, and which is, even now I repeat to everybody, including my son. If there is no canvas, there is no painting. You are the canvas. So first, make sure the canvas is in clean and neat and proper shape. If the canvas is not in proper shape, you can't draw anything.
Understood. Well, Deepa, I feel like we've heard a lot about how you've grown and expanded as the recipient of Shyam's bluntness. Will you share a little bit about your journey to become a blunt woman, expressing yourself to Shyam? Because it's actually often easier to receive such communications and find the way into being right with them. And it can be such a big leap for a woman to be uncensored and explicit in return. And again, as we distinguished bluntness in a moron versus bluntness in a sensitive person, for many women, it's not that hard to express a kind of truth wrapped in anger or fueled by anger. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about lovingly saying the
Right.
truth that all your life you've been taught you shouldn't say. Tell us about that evolution.
Yes. Sure. So first of all, Alexandra, I think as I mentioned that you need to be able to learn from, in my case, there were past experiences. So I did learn a lot of what not to do. And then I think what you're asking me for is that as a woman, I needed to have a balance between finding my strength and finding my vulnerability, because you need to be vulnerable in order to grow on the journey to be explicit. So let me give you an example. So let's say that I saw Shyam being friendly to a girlfriend or a client, and then it bothered me, right? So in my past avatar, I would have kept it to myself. I would have let it work into me until I felt miserable. I wouldn't talk about it to anybody. But what changed was I started to be vulnerable. So I started to tell him, hey, I didn't like how you behaved. That made me feel there was some connection which was less between the two of us. Sometimes, yes, I know that women hold it back until it becomes this bubbling bottle inside, and then you unplug the cork when there's so much of force, which is what you meant, that women can't express unless they're boiling with anger. And that's how it was for me initially. So I would hold it in, and then one fine day it would erupt without my control. And then Shyam would look at me like, have you gone mad? So he'd actually be flabbergasted as to my feelings. Along the way, I started to change that. So I didn't hold that in until it came out erupting with anger. And it will, for every single woman out there, I would say, if you don't find a way to express what you feel today, it will find its way out of you. But at that moment, it will come coated in this bubble of anger, and you don't want that. So I would say start by being vulnerable. Go up. I mean, it's fine. Like right now, I would go tell Shyam, no, I didn't like that. You spoke to her in a way that I didn't like it. And I think it's best that you confront what you feel and express it. Hold yourself vulnerable to actually go and say that. And that actually is the first step to becoming stronger.
Deepa, what would you like people to know who want to follow up and experience some of your magic?
I think just to go listen to my podcast, which is a space of so much more than just sleep. And I think a lot of people who are struggling I know, Alexandra, that when I was struggling in my relationship before, that sleep was one of the greatest challenges for me because I didn't feel safe. And I think just like we spoke about voice, I think to be able to sleep as well, you need to feel a sense of safety. So if anyone is struggling with aspects of safety, then take a listen to the podcast.
Beautiful. And I really concur that your podcast, The Sleep Whisperer, remember from the beginning of this episode, don't look for Sleep Whisperer, just The Sleep Whisperer, that your podcast, in being about sleep, is also so much about wakefulness. So
Yes.
I'm really so grateful to have this conversation with the two of you and be able to share it with anyone who has yet to find a partner, is early in a long relationship, is well into a first marriage or a second marriage. There's been so much of value that you've shared, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
Mine as well. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.